The dust cloud rose like a funeral shroud behind the stagecoach as it lurched into Prescott, Arizona territory, on that scorching August afternoon in 1878. And inside sat Catherine Lancaster, with nothing but the threadbare dress on her back, and a heart full of desperate hope. The wheels ground to a halt outside the Wells Fargo office, and Catherine pressed her palm against the worn leather seat to steady herself. Through the small window, she could see the bustling main street of Prescott, a town that had promised employment in the carefully worded advertisement she had answered 3 months ago. That promise now seemed as distant as the Philadelphia life she had fled. The driver's weathered face appeared at the door. "Last stop, miss. Prescott." Catherine gathered her small cloth bag, the only possession she had managed to keep after her father's debts had consumed everything else. She stepped down onto the wooden boardwalk, her legs unsteady after 3 weeks of relentless travel. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, and she raised a hand to shield her eyes. The town sprawled before her in shades of brown and gray. False-fronted buildings lined the dirt street, and the mountains rose in the distance like ancient sentinels. Men in dusty clothes moved with purpose between the general store, the saloon, and the livery stable. A few women in simple calico dresses hurried along the boardwalk, their eyes downcast. Catherine clutched her bag tighter and approached a woman carrying a basket of vegetables. "Excuse me, madam. I am looking for the Morrison household. I was hired as a governess." The woman's expression shifted to something between pity and discomfort. "Oh dear, you have not heard, Mrs. Morrison passed on 2 months ago. Fever took her and both children. Mr. Morrison sold up and moved back east last week." The words hit Catherine like a physical blow. She steadied herself against a wooden post, her knuckles white. "I see. Thank you for telling me." The woman hesitated, then hurried away, leaving Catherine alone on the boardwalk. Around her, the town continued its daily rhythm, indifferent to the fact that her entire future had just crumbled to dust. She had no money for return passage. She had no family to wire for help. She had nothing. Catherine walked slowly down the street, her mind racing through impossible calculations. A sign advertised rooms at the boarding house for $2 a week. She had 17 cents in her pocket. The general store window displayed goods she could not afford. The saloon doors swung open, releasing a wave of tobacco smoke and rough laughter that made her quicken her pace. She found herself at the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to scattered houses and corrals. A large ranch spread out to the south, its fence posts marching into the distance. Catherine sank onto a bench outside what appeared to be a church, though it was smaller and plainer than any church she had known in Philadelphia. The enormity of her situation settled over her like a suffocating blanket. She had traveled across the entire country to a position that no longer existed. She had no skills that would serve her in a rough frontier town. She was utterly and completely alone. "You look like you have had a hell of a day." Catherine's head snapped up. A man stood a few feet away, his hat in his hands. He was tall and lean, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of creek water in summer. Dust covered his clothes, and a bandana hung loose around his neck. He looked to be in his middle 20s, perhaps 6 or 7 years older than herself. "I apologize for my language," he continued, his voice carrying a soft drawl, "but you look like you could use some water at least." Catherine straightened her spine, summoning the dignity her mother had instilled in her. "I am quite well, thank you." "With respect, miss, you do not look well. You look about ready to keel over, and I cannot in good conscience let that happen outside the church. Pastor would have my hide." A slight smile touched his weathered face. "Name is Thomas Ellsworth. I work at the Double R Ranch just south of town." "Catherine Lancaster." She hesitated, then added, "And you are correct. It has been a difficult day." Thomas gestured to the bench. "Mind if I sit? I promise I am harmless, and there are enough people around that you need not worry about propriety." Catherine nodded, too exhausted to protest. Thomas sat at a respectful distance and pulled a canteen from his belt. He offered it to her. "Water is clean. Filled it from the well this morning." She accepted it gratefully, taking small sips of the cool water. It was the first kindness anyone had shown her since she left Missouri. "You came in on that last stage," Thomas observed. "It was not a question." "Yes, I was meant to take a position as a governess, but I have just learned that the family is gone." Thomas was quiet for a moment, his gaze on the distant mountains. "The Morrisons, terrible thing that, good people. I did not know them, but I am sorry for their loss." Catherine handed back the canteen. "And now I find myself in rather desperate circumstances. I have no money, no prospects, and no means of returning east." She did not know what possessed her to be so honest with a complete stranger. Perhaps it was exhaustion. Perhaps it was the genuine concern in his eyes. Perhaps it was simply that she had no energy left for pretense. Thomas was silent, his brow furrowed in thought. Finally, he said, "The double R might be looking for help. Not governess work, mind you, Mrs. Riley, the ranch owner's wife. She has been poorly lately. Could use someone to help with the house, cooking, that sort of thing." Hope flickered in Catherine's chest. "I can cook. My mother taught me, and I can clean and mend and manage a household. It would not be easy work. Ranch life is hard." "I am not afraid of hard work, Mr. Ellsworth." Thomas studied her for a long moment, taking in her fine features, her educated speech, her obvious Eastern breeding. Catherine held his gaze, willing him to see past the delicate exterior to the steel beneath. She had not survived the loss of her parents, the seizure of her home, and a 3-week journey across hostile territory by being fragile. "All right then," Thomas said, standing and replacing his hat. "Let me take you out to the ranch. Mrs. Riley is a fair woman. She will at least hear you out." Catherine rose, smoothing her dusty skirt. "Thank you, Mr. Ellsworth. I am grateful. Just Thomas, please. We do not stand much on formality out here." They walked to the livery stable, where Thomas retrieved his horse, a sturdy bay gelding with intelligent eyes. He helped Catherine up onto the saddle, then swung up behind her. She tensed at the proximity, but Thomas kept a respectful distance, his hands steady on the reins. The ride to the Double R took 20 minutes. The ranch house came into view first, a long adobe structure with a covered porch and several outbuildings scattered around it. Cattle grazed in distant pastures, and several men worked near the corrals. The whole operation spoke of prosperity and careful management. Thomas helped Catherine down and led her to the front door. A Mexican woman answered his knock, her expression curious. "Maria, is Mrs. Riley well enough for visitors? This is Miss Lancaster. She might be able to help with the housework." Maria's eyes lit up. "Oh yes, come in, Mrs. Riley will be so happy to see you." The interior of the house was surprisingly cool and comfortable. Whitewashed walls reflected the light from several windows, and simple but well-made furniture filled the main room. Maria led them through to a bedroom where a woman in her 50s lay propped against pillows. Her face was thin and pale, but her eyes were sharp and kind. "Mrs. Riley, this is Catherine Lancaster," Thomas said. "She came in on the stage today expecting to work for the Morrisons. When she found out what happened, I thought she might be able to help you." Mrs. Riley gestured for Catherine to come closer. "Sit down, child. Let me look at you." Catherine sat in the chair beside the bed, acutely aware of her travel-stained appearance. Mrs. Riley studied her with the same intensity Thomas had shown, but her gaze was more assessing. "You are educated," Mrs. Riley said, It was not a question. Yes, madam, my father was a professor in Philadelphia. What brings you to the Arizona Territory? Catherine had prepared a polite version of her story, but something about Mrs. Riley's direct gaze made her tell the truth. My father died 2 years ago, leaving substantial debts. My mother passed last winter from pneumonia. Everything we owned was sold to satisfy the creditors. I answered an advertisement for a governess position because I had no other options. And now you have even fewer options. Yes, madam. Mrs. Riley was quiet for a moment, then said, I have been ill for 3 months. The doctor says my heart is weak and I need rest. But this ranch does not stop operating because I am tired. Maria does what she can, but she has her own family to care for. I need someone who can manage the household, oversee the cooking and cleaning, handle the accounts, and deal with the men when they need supplies or have concerns. It is not genteel work. I am not looking for genteel work, Mrs. Riley. I am looking for honest employment. A smile touched Mrs. Riley's thin lips. You have spirit, I like that. The pay is $20 a month plus room and board. You will have Sundays off for church if you are inclined. The hours are long and the work is hard, but you will be treated fairly. Is that acceptable? $20 a month was far less than she would have earned as a governess, but it was infinitely more than the nothing she currently possessed. Yes, madam, very acceptable. Thank you. Do not thank me yet. You have not experienced a full day here. Mrs. Riley looked past Catherine to where Thomas stood in the doorway. Thomas, show Miss Lancaster to the spare room behind the kitchen. Maria can get her settled, and thank you for bringing her out here. My pleasure, Mrs. Riley. Thomas tipped his hat to both women. Catherine followed Thomas back through the house and out to a small structure connected to the main house by a covered walkway. Inside was a simple but clean room with a bed, a washstand, a small table, and hooks on the wall for clothes. It is not much, Thomas said, but it is private and secure. It is perfect. Catherine set down her small bag, which looked even more pathetic in the sparse room. She turned to face Thomas. I do not know how to thank you properly. If you had not stopped to speak with me, I do not know what I would have done. Thomas shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable with her gratitude. Any decent person would have done the same. I have learned that decency is rarer than it should be. Thank you, Thomas. He met her eyes, and something passed between them in that moment. An understanding, perhaps, or a recognition. Then Thomas cleared his throat and stepped back. I should get back to work. If you need anything, just ask Maria or Mrs. Riley. Welcome to the Double R, Catherine. She watched him walk away, his long stride eating up the distance to the corrals. Then she turned back to her new room and allowed herself a moment of relief. She had a roof over her head. She had employment. She had survived. The next morning began before dawn. Maria woke Catherine with a gentle knock and a cup of strong coffee. The men eat breakfast at 5, Maria explained. Usually biscuits, eggs, bacon, beans. I will show you where everything is. Catherine dressed quickly in her only other dress, which was no cleaner than the one she had worn yesterday. She followed Maria to the kitchen, a large room dominated by a massive iron stove. Maria moved through the space with practiced efficiency, showing Catherine where the supplies were kept, how the stove drew best, how much food to prepare for the dozen men who worked the ranch. They worked side by side in comfortable silence, and Catherine found a strange peace in the simple tasks. Back in Philadelphia, they had employed a cook and maid. Her mother had taught her the basics of household management, but Catherine had never cooked for more than a handful of people. Here, she fried eggs by the dozen and mixed enough biscuit dough to feed an army. The men began filing in as the sun crested the horizon. They were a rough lot, weathered by sun and wind, but they were polite. They removed their hats and thanked her quietly for the food. Catherine poured coffee and kept the platters full, studying the faces around the long table. Thomas came in last, his hair damp from washing. His eyes found hers across the room, and he nodded a greeting before taking a seat at the far end of the table. Catherine noticed that the other men seemed to defer to him slightly, asking his opinion on the day's work, listening when he spoke. After breakfast, the men dispersed to their various tasks. Thomas lingered, carrying dishes to the kitchen while Maria shooed him away. "I can help," he protested. "You have cattle to tend. We can handle dishes." Maria made a dismissive gesture and Thomas laughed. "Yes, madam." He caught Catherine's eye. "How was your first morning?" "Exhausting but satisfying," Catherine admitted. "I had forgotten how good it feels to accomplish something tangible. You will have plenty of opportunity for accomplishment here." Thomas hesitated, then added, "If you need anything, or if any of the men give you trouble, you let me know." "I will, thank you." After he left, Maria gave Catherine a knowing look. "Thomas is a good man, the best on this ranch. Mr. Riley trusts him with everything." "Where is Mr. Riley?" Catherine asked. She had not seen the ranch owner yet. "He is driving cattle to Flagstaff. Will be gone another week at least." Maria handed Catherine a dishcloth. "Mrs. Riley runs things while he is away. She is a strong woman, but this illness has been hard on her." They spent the rest of the morning cleaning the house and preparing food for the midday meal. Catherine's back ached and her hands grew rough from lye soap, but she worked without complaint. This was her chance, perhaps her only chance, to build a new life. She would not fail because the work was hard. Around noon, one of the ranch hands came to the kitchen door. "Miss Lancaster, Thomas says there is a problem with the supply order. He needs you to look at it." Catherine dried her hands and followed the man to a small office off the main room. Thomas stood behind a desk covered in papers, his expression frustrated. "I apologize for bothering you," he said, "but I cannot make sense of these invoices. Mrs. Riley usually handles this, but she is resting, and the supplier is demanding payment." Catherine moved around the desk and studied the papers. It took her only a few minutes to identify the problem. "They have charged you twice for the same order of flour. See here. The dates are the same, but they listed it under two different invoice numbers." Thomas leaned over her shoulder to look, and Catherine was suddenly very aware of his proximity. He smelled of leather and soap and sunshine. She forced herself to concentrate on the papers. "I will be damned," Thomas muttered. "I have been staring at this for an hour." "How did you see that so quickly?" "My father taught me bookkeeping. He said every educated person should understand numbers." Catherine sorted through the other invoices. "These all appear correct except for this one. You should send it back and demand a corrected bill." "I will do that." "Thank you, Catherine. You just saved the ranch a significant amount of money," she smiled. "Then I have already begun earning my keep." Thomas gathered the papers but did not move away. "You are different from what I expected when I saw you on that bench yesterday." "What did you expect?" "Someone more fragile, I suppose. Someone who would wilt under the first bit of hardship." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "But you have steel in you, I can see it." "Hardship has a way of revealing what we are truly made of," Catherine said softly. "I discovered I am stronger than I thought." "Good. You will need that strength here." Thomas finally stepped back, the professional distance returning. "I should get back to work. Thank you again for your help." The days developed into a rhythm. Catherine rose before dawn, prepared breakfast for the ranch hands, cleaned the house, managed the accounts, and helped Maria with countless other tasks. She fell into bed each night exhausted but satisfied. The work was hard, but it was honest and she was good at it. Mrs. Riley improved gradually under Catherine's care. With the household running smoothly, the older woman could rest properly. She began sitting on the porch in the afternoons, directing operations from her chair like a general commanding troops. Catherine would join her when time allowed, and they would discuss the ranch business, the town gossip, and sometimes their own histories. "You remind me of myself when I was young," Mrs. Riley said one afternoon. "I came west with nothing but determination and a willingness to work. Met my husband at a trading post in New Mexico. He was a cowboy then, rough as they come. But he was honest and hardworking, and I loved him for it." Catherine thought of Thomas but said nothing. She had caught herself watching him more than was proper, noticing the way he moved with easy confidence, the way he treated the horses with gentle firmness, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. It was foolish to develop feelings for a man so far above her current station, but her heart seemed not to care about propriety or sense. Thomas, for his part, found excuses to spend time near the house. He would bring questions about supplies or ask Catherine to look over invoices that probably did not need her attention. They would talk while she worked, sharing stories about their pasts and dreams for the future. "I am saving to buy my own place," Thomas told her one evening as she snapped beans on the porch. He sat on the steps, his hat beside him. "Nothing big, just enough land for a small herd and a house. I have been working for the Rileys for 5 years now, saving every penny I can spare." "That is a good dream," Catherine said. "A place of your own built with your own hands and effort. What about you? What do you dream of?" Catherine considered the question. A year ago, she would have said she dreamed of returning to Philadelphia to the life she had known. But that world had rejected her, cast her out. Now, sitting on a porch in the Arizona Territory with calloused hands and the smell of supper cooking, she found her dreams had changed. "I dream of belonging somewhere," she said finally. "Of having a place where I am needed and valued for who I am, not who my father was or what my name used to mean. I dream of being useful." Thomas looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You are all those things already, Catherine. Can you not see that?" Before she could respond, Maria called from the kitchen that supper was ready. The moment passed, but Catherine felt the weight of Thomas's words settle around her heart like a warm blanket. Summer faded into autumn, and Catherine had been at the Double R for 3 months. She had learned to judge the quality of cattle by sight, to predict weather from the behavior of the horses, to manage a household budget down to the last penny. She had also learned the rhythms of Thomas's days, the sound of his footsteps, the cadence of his voice. Mr. Riley returned from his cattle drive and immediately appreciated the improvements Catherine had made. The accounts were organized, the house ran smoothly, and his wife was healthier than she had been in months. "You are a treasure, Miss Lancaster," he said one evening at supper. "I hope we can convince you to stay permanently." "I have no intention of leaving," Catherine assured him. "This place feels more like home than anywhere I have ever lived." Across the table, Thomas's eyes met hers. Something passed between them, a silent acknowledgement of feelings neither had spoken aloud. The town of Prescott held a harvest dance in late October. Mrs. Riley insisted that Catherine attend. "You have worked yourself nearly to death these past months. You deserve an evening of enjoyment." Maria helped Catherine alter one of Mrs. Riley's old dresses, a green calico that brought out the color of Catherine's eyes. It was simple compared to the gown she had worn in Philadelphia, but it was clean and well-fitted, and Catherine felt pretty for the first time in months. Thomas drove her into town in the ranch wagon, looking uncomfortable in clean trousers and a pressed shirt. "I feel like a dressed-up pig," he muttered. Catherine laughed. "You look perfectly presentable. Handsome, even." He glanced at her, startled. "You think so?" "I do." Catherine felt bold in the growing darkness. "You clean up rather well, Thomas Ellsworth." The dance was held in the largest barn in town, with lanterns strung from the rafters and a three-piece band playing lively tunes. It seemed the entire population of Prescott had turned out. Catherine recognized some of the people she had seen in town, though few had spoken to her beyond basic pleasantries. Thomas guided her through the crowd with a protective hand at her back. Several men asked Catherine to dance, and she accepted politely, but she found herself constantly aware of where Thomas was, who he was talking to, whether he was watching her. Finally, as the evening wore on, Thomas approached her. "Would you care to dance, Miss Lancaster?" "I would be delighted, Mr. Ellsworth." He led her onto the floor as the band struck up a waltz. Thomas's hand was warm at her waist, and he guided her through the steps with surprising grace. "You are a good dancer," Catherine said. "My mother insisted I learn." Said it was the mark of a gentleman. Thomas smiled at the memory. "She died when I was 16. I think she would have liked you. I would have liked to meet her." They danced in silence for a moment, then Thomas said quietly, "Catherine, I need to tell you something. I have been trying to find the right words for weeks now, but there do not seem to be any right words, so I will just speak plainly." Catherine's heart began to race. "All right. I have come to care for you deeply, more than is probably wise given our situations. But I cannot stop thinking about you. I cannot stop wanting to be near you. When I am working, I find myself counting the hours until I can see you again." He paused, his jaw tight. "I know I have little to offer. I am just a cowboy with some savings and a dream of a ranch. You are educated and refined, and you deserve better than a man who spends his days covered in dust and cattle muck. But if you could possibly see your way to caring for me even a little, I would count myself the luckiest man in the territory." Catherine stopped dancing, forcing Thomas to halt as well. Around them, other couples swirled past, but she was aware only of Thomas's face, the vulnerability in his eyes, the hope and fear warring there. "Thomas," she said softly, "I have cared for you since that first day when you offered me water outside the church. You showed me kindness when I had nothing and no one. You brought me to the ranch and gave me a chance at a new life. But more than that, you have treated me with respect and friendship. You have made me laugh when I thought I would never laugh again. You have made me believe that I might deserve happiness after all." Thomas's expression shifted from fear to cautious hope. "Does that mean what I think it means?" "It means I care for you too, deeply. It means that when I dream of the future, you are in it." The smile that broke across Thomas's face was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. He pulled her closer, propriety forgotten, and they resumed dancing with their bodies pressed together in a way that would have scandalized Philadelphia society. Here, in a barn in Arizona, no one seemed to notice or care. They left the dance early and drove back to the ranch in a state of giddy happiness. Thomas held the reins with one hand and Catherine's fingers with the other. They talked about everything and nothing, making plans, sharing dreams, laughing at the sheer improbability of having found each other. When they reached the ranch, Thomas helped Catherine down from the wagon. Instead of releasing her immediately, he kept his hands at her waist. The moon hung low and full, casting silver light across the yard. "May I kiss you?" Thomas asked. "Please," Catherine whispered. He kissed her gently at first, then with growing passion. Catherine wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back with all the emotion she had been holding inside for months. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. "I love you, Catherine Lancaster," Thomas said. "I know I should probably wait longer to say that, but it is the truth, and I have never been good at lying." "I love you too, Thomas Ellsworth. I did not expect to find love when I stepped off that stagecoach. I did not even believe I was capable of love anymore. but you changed everything." They stood together under the stars, holding each other, until finally propriety and exhaustion forced them to part. Catherine went to her small room and lay awake for hours, her heart too full for sleep. The next morning, Thomas spoke to Mr. and Mrs. Riley. Catherine waited nervously in the kitchen while Maria patted her hand and assured her everything would be fine. When Thomas emerged from the house an hour later, his face was serious. Catherine's heart sank. Then he saw her and grinned, and she knew everything was all right. "Mr. Riley has given me a raise and a promotion," Thomas said, pulling Catherine into his arms despite Maria's presence. "I am now foreman of the Double R. The pay is enough that I can support a wife if I can convince a certain lady to marry me." "Oh, I think that certain lady might be convinced," Catherine said, laughing through sudden tears. "Particularly if the proposal is properly done." Thomas immediately dropped to one knee, heedless of the dirt. "Catherine Lancaster, you arrived in this town with nothing, but you brought more wealth than you know. You brought intelligence, strength, kindness, and love. You have transformed my life in every way. Will you do me the very great honor of becoming my wife?" "Yes," Catherine said without hesitation. "Yes, absolutely yes." Thomas stood and swept her into his arms, spinning her around while Maria clapped and shouted congratulations in rapid Spanish. Mrs. Riley appeared on the porch, looking healthier than she had in months. "I suppose you will be wanting a wedding then?" "As soon as possible," Thomas said, grinning. "The pastor can perform the ceremony Sunday after service," Mrs. Riley said. "That gives us 5 days to prepare. Maria, we have work to do." The next 5 days passed in a blur of activity. Catherine had no family to invite and no money for an elaborate celebration, but the Rileys treated her like a daughter. Mrs. Riley gave Catherine a beautiful cream-colored dress that she had worn years ago. Maria and several women from town helped alter it to fit Catherine's slimmer frame. Mr. Riley arranged for a photographer to come from Flagstaff. The ranch hands pooled their money to buy Catherine and Thomas a set of fine china as a wedding gift. Thomas worked during the days but spent every evening with Catherine, talking about their future. He had enough saved for a down payment on land adjacent to the Double R. Mr. Riley had agreed to help with the purchase and to provide cattle for Thomas's starter herd. In a year or two, Thomas would have his own ranch, and Catherine would be there beside him, building something from nothing together. Sunday arrived clear and bright. Catherine dressed in the altered wedding gown, her hands shaking slightly as Maria helped with the buttons. The face that looked back at her from the small mirror was transformed. Gone was the desperate girl who had stepped off the stagecoach 5 months ago. In her place was a woman in love, about to marry a good man and start a new life. The ceremony took place in the small church where Catherine had first sat in despair. Now she walked down the short aisle on Mr. Riley's arm, her eyes locked on Thomas's face. He stood at the front in his best clothes, his hair neatly combed, his eyes shining with emotion. The pastor spoke the traditional words, but Catherine barely heard them. She was aware only of Thomas's strong hands holding hers, his steady voice as he spoke his vows, the way he looked at her as though she was the most precious thing in the world. "I, Thomas Ellsworth, take you, Catherine Lancaster, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to love you, protect you, and cherish you all the days of my life. I give you my heart and my name and everything I am or will ever be." Catherine's voice was steady as she replied, "I, Catherine Lancaster, take you, Thomas Ellsworth, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to love you, support you, and stand beside you all the days of my life. I give you my heart and my devotion and everything I am or will ever be." The pastor pronounced them husband and wife, and Thomas kissed her while the small congregation applauded. Catherine felt a joy so complete it almost hurt. This man, this good and honest man, had given her everything when she had nothing. He had seen past her circumstances to the person beneath. And now they belonged to each other, bound by love and law and solemn promise. The celebration afterward was simple but heartfelt. The ranch hands had set up tables outside the church, and the women of the town had brought food. There was dancing and laughter and toasts with sarsaparilla since the Rileys were temperance folks. Catherine danced first with her new husband, then with Mr. Riley, then with several of the ranch hands who had become her friends over the past months. As the sun set and the celebration wound down, Thomas and Catherine climbed into a wagon decorated with ribbons and bells. The ranch hands cheered and whistled as they drove away toward a small cabin on the edge of the Double R property. Mr. Riley had given them the cabin as a wedding gift, a place of their own until Thomas's ranch was ready. The cabin was tiny, just one room with a bed, a table, and a stove, but Catherine had never seen anything more beautiful. Thomas carried her over the threshold, and they both laughed at the traditional gesture. "Welcome home, Mrs. Ellsworth," Thomas said, setting her gently on her feet. "Mrs. Ellsworth," Catherine repeated, savoring the sound. "I never thought I would be so happy to lose my maiden name, but Catherine Ellsworth sounds absolutely perfect." Thomas cupped her face in his hands. "I love you so much. I will spend the rest of my life trying to make you happy. You already make me happy. You gave me hope when I had none. You gave me a future when mine was lost. You gave me your heart and your name, and I promise you will never regret it." They made love that night with tenderness and passion, learning each other's bodies, whispering promises and declarations of love. Catherine had been nervous, but Thomas was gentle and patient, and by the time the moon set, they lay tangled together in perfect contentment. The weeks after the wedding passed in a haze of happiness. Catherine continued managing the Riley household during the day while Thomas worked the ranch. Their evenings were spent in the cabin, cooking together, talking, planning for the future, and reveling in their new marriage. Winter came to the Arizona territory, bringing cooler temperatures and occasional rain. Thomas spent his free hours working on the land he had purchased, clearing brush, building fences, preparing for the spring when he would move his cattle to his own property. Catherine discovered she was pregnant in January. She had suspected for a few weeks, but Maria confirmed it with the knowing eye of a woman who had borne 6 children herself. "You are glowing," Maria said, "and you have been green around the gills every morning. When is the baby due?" Catherine calculated quickly. "Late August, I think. Maybe early September." She told Thomas that evening, nervous about his reaction. They had not planned for a baby so soon, though they had certainly hoped for children eventually. Thomas's response erased all her worries. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing with pure joy. "A baby. We are going to have a baby. Catherine, that is the best news I have ever heard. You are happy then?" "Happy. I am beyond happy. I am ecstatic. We are going to be parents." Thomas set her down carefully, suddenly solicitous. "Should you be working so hard? Is it safe? Should you be resting more?" Catherine laughed at his concern. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I am perfectly healthy. Maria says I can continue working until my 7th or 8th month as long as I am careful. Still, you need to take care of yourself and our baby." Thomas placed his hand on her still flat stomach with something like wonder. "I cannot believe it. A tiny person, half you and half me, growing right now." They told the Rileys the next day, and Mrs. Riley immediately insisted that Catherine cut back her hours. "You need rest, dear. The household can manage with less supervision. Your health and the baby's health come first." The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Catherine experienced morning sickness for a few weeks, then felt better than she had in years. Her body changed, her belly swelling with new life, and Thomas treated her like precious glass. He built a cradle in the evenings, working the wood with careful attention to detail. Catherine sewed tiny clothes from fabric Mrs. Riley gave her, marveling at the smallness of the garments. Spring arrived, and Thomas moved his small herd to his own land. He spent long days working his ranch while still fulfilling his duties as foreman for the Rileys. Catherine worried he was working too hard, but Thomas insisted he was fine. "I am building our future," he said. "Every fence post I set, every cow I tend, every acre I clear is for you and our baby. I want our child to grow up on land we own in a house we built, with the knowledge that hard work and determination can overcome anything." In late April, Thomas began building their house. It would not be large or fancy, but it would be theirs. Mr. Riley gave him time off from ranch duties to work on construction, and several of the hands helped in their free time. The house rose from the prairie slowly but surely, a testament to Thomas's vision and determination. Catherine visited the building site often, her swollen belly preceding her. She would bring cold water and sandwiches for the workers and offer suggestions about the layout. Thomas incorporated every idea she had, determined that the house be as much hers as his. By July, the house was finished enough to be habitable. It had 3 rooms, a main living area with a kitchen, a bedroom, and a smaller room for the baby. The floors were wood planking, the walls whitewashed adobe. It was simple and practical and absolutely perfect. They moved in on a blazingly hot Saturday, carrying their few possessions from the cabin. Catherine arranged their wedding china in a rough-hewn cupboard Thomas had built. She hung curtains she had sewn from flour sacks. She placed the cradle beside their bed and imagined what it would be like when their baby lay sleeping there. That night, they sat on their small porch and watched the sun set over their land. Catherine leaned against Thomas, his arm around her shoulders, and felt a contentment so deep it brought tears to her eyes. "What is wrong?" Thomas asked, immediately concerned. "Nothing is wrong. Everything is right, perfectly, completely right." Catherine wiped her eyes. "A year ago I was alone and terrified, with no money and no prospects. I thought my life was over, and now look at me. I have a husband I love, a home, a baby coming, and a future full of hope. It is almost too much happiness to contain." Thomas kissed her temple. "You deserve every bit of it. You are the strongest, bravest, most amazing woman I have ever known. I thank God every day that you got off that stagecoach with nothing, because it brought you to me." Catherine went into labor on a scorching afternoon in late August. She had been hanging laundry when the first pain struck, doubling her over. Maria, who had been visiting, immediately took charge. She sent one of her sons to fetch Thomas from the range and another to bring Mrs. Riley and the midwife from town. By the time Thomas came thundering up on horseback, Catherine was in their bedroom with Maria and Mrs. Riley attending her. The contractions were coming regularly now, and Catherine gripped the sheets and tried to remember to breathe the way Maria had taught her. Thomas burst into the room, wild-eyed with fear, only to be immediately shooed out by Maria. "This is women's work. You wait outside. But Catherine will be fine. Go." Thomas paced the main room like a caged animal, starting at every cry from the bedroom. The hours dragged by. The sun set, and still the baby had not come. Thomas sat with his head in his hands, praying harder than he ever had in his life. Finally, just after midnight, a baby's cry pierced the air. Thomas was on his feet instantly. Maria emerged from the bedroom, smiling broadly. "You have a son," she announced. A healthy, strong boy, and Catherine as well, tired but well. Thomas rushed into the bedroom. Catherine lay propped against pillows, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a blanket. She looked up as Thomas entered, and her smile was like the sun. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Thomas approached the bed with trembling hands. Catherine pulled back the blanket, revealing a red-faced infant with a shock of dark hair and tiny, perfect features. The baby's eyes were squeezed shut, and his little fists waved in the air. "He is perfect," Thomas breathed. "Absolutely perfect, just like his mother." He sat carefully on the edge of the bed, and Catherine placed the baby in his arms. Thomas held his son with exquisite care, as though the baby might shatter. The infant opened his eyes briefly, revealing gray-blue eyes that would likely change color in the coming weeks. "What should we name him?" Catherine asked. They had discussed names for months but had not settled on anything definite. Thomas studied his son's face, then said, "I would like to name him after your father, if that is all right with you. James Lancaster Ellsworth." Catherine's eyes filled with tears. "My father would have been so proud. Not just of his namesake, but of you. He believed in good men doing good work, and you are the best man I know. James it is, then." Thomas kissed his son's forehead, then carefully handed him back to Catherine. He took her hand and squeezed gently. "Thank you. Thank you for him, for us, for this life we have built together." "We built it together," Catherine said. "You gave me the foundation when I had nothing, but we built the rest together, and it is ours." The first months of James's life passed in a blur of feedings and diaper changes and sleepless nights. Catherine was exhausted, but happier than she had ever been. Thomas helped whenever he could, walking the floor with James when he was fussy, changing diapers without complaint, marveling at every small development. James was a healthy baby with a good appetite and his father's easy temperament. By 3 months, he was sleeping through the night, allowing Catherine to regain some of her energy. She returned to helping manage the Riley household a few hours each day, bringing James with her. Mrs. Riley doted on the baby, and Catherine often found her holding James while directing ranch business from her chair. Thomas's ranch grew steadily. He added to his herd gradually, never overextending himself, always careful with money. Catherine managed their household accounts with the same precision she brought to everything else. They saved every penny they could, planning for the future. When James was 6 months old, Mr. Riley approached Thomas with a proposition. He wanted to retire and spend his remaining years traveling with his wife. Would Thomas be interested in purchasing the Double R? The price would be fair, and Riley would hold the mortgage himself with favorable terms. Thomas and Catherine discussed it long into the night. It was a tremendous opportunity, but also a significant risk. If they bought the Double R, they would be responsible for a large operation with multiple employees. They would have to merge Thomas's smaller ranch with the larger property. It would mean more work and more responsibility, but also more security and potential for growth. "What do you think?" Thomas asked Catherine. "I will not make this decision without you. We are partners in this life." Catherine looked at their sleeping son, then at her husband. "I think we should do it. I think we should take the chance. We have worked so hard to build something from nothing. This is our opportunity to build something truly substantial, not just for us but for James and whatever other children we might have." They bought the Double R in the spring of 1880. Thomas was now not just a ranch owner, but the owner of one of the larger operations in the territory. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. The work was unrelenting. Thomas managed the cattle operations while Catherine handled the business side, keeping the books, managing the payroll, and dealing with suppliers. They moved from their small house into the larger ranch house, though Catherine kept their first home for sentimental reasons. Maria stayed on as housekeeper, and her presence was invaluable. She watched James when Catherine needed to work and provided advice and support. The ranch hands, most of whom had worked for the Rileys for years, accepted Thomas's leadership readily. He was fair and hardworking, and he never asked them to do anything he would not do himself. 2 years later, Catherine gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Sarah. She had Catherine's delicate features and Thomas's gray-green eyes. James, now a rambunctious toddler, was fascinated by his little sister and constantly wanted to help care for her. Life settled into a new rhythm. The ranch prospered under Thomas's management. They expanded the herd, improved the grazing land, and built a reputation for quality cattle. Catherine's business acumen proved invaluable. She negotiated better prices with buyers and found new markets for their beef. Together, they made a formidable team. The years passed with the inevitable mixture of joy and hardship that marks all lives. There were droughts that threatened the herd and winters harsh enough to test their resolve. There were cattle rustlers and predators and market downturns. But through it all, Thomas and Catherine faced every challenge together, their love and partnership only growing stronger. James grew into a serious boy who loved working alongside his father. Sarah was bright and spirited, equally comfortable helping her mother with household accounts or riding alongside the ranch hands. Catherine and Thomas marveled at their children, these beautiful souls they had created together. In 1885, when James was 7 and Sarah was 5, Catherine discovered she was pregnant again. The pregnancy was harder than the previous 2, and the birth even harder. Catherine labored for nearly 20 hours before delivering twin boys. The first was healthy and strong, but the second was smaller and struggled to breathe. Thomas and Catherine named them Daniel and David, and for the first few days they feared they might lose David, but David proved to have his mother's strength. He clung to life with fierce determination, and gradually he grew stronger. By 6 months, he had caught up to his brother in size and development. The twins were inseparable from the start, their own little unit within the family. The ranch house rang with the noise and chaos of 4 children. Catherine sometimes looked around at the beautiful disorder of her life and remembered that desperate girl on the bench outside the church. It seemed impossible that this was the same person. She had been transformed by love, by hard work, by the sheer determination to build a good life. In the spring of 1890, 12 years after Catherine had arrived on that dusty stagecoach, the town of Prescott held a celebration marking the territory's progress. Thomas, as one of the successful ranchers in the area, was asked to speak. He reluctantly agreed, uncomfortable with public attention. Catherine sat in the front row with their children around her, watching her husband stand before the assembled crowd. James sat on her right, nearly as tall as she was at 12 years old. Sarah held baby David on her lap while Daniel fidgeted beside her. They were a beautiful family, healthy and happy and together. Thomas spoke briefly about the growth of the cattle industry and the importance of hard work and integrity. Then his eyes found Catherine in the crowd, and his expression softened. "But I want to speak about something more important than cattle or business," he said. "I want to speak about taking chances on people. 12 years ago, I met a young woman outside the church. She had just arrived on the last stagecoach with nothing, no money, no job, no prospects. She was educated and refined, completely unprepared for the harshness of frontier life. Many people would have overlooked her or dismissed her as unsuited for this territory." Catherine's eyes filled with tears as Thomas continued, "But I saw something in her that day. I saw strength and determination and courage. I took a chance and brought her to the ranch where I worked. She took that chance and transformed it into something beautiful. She worked harder than anyone I have ever known. She learned skills she never imagined she would need. She built a life from nothing through sheer force of will and unshakable spirit. Thomas paused, his voice thick with emotion. That woman is my wife, Catherine Ellsworth. She is the mother of my children, my business partner, and my best friend. She arrived with nothing, and I gave her my heart and my name. But in truth, she gave me far more than I ever gave her. She gave me a family, a home, and a love deeper than I knew was possible. Every success I have achieved is because of her. Every happiness in my life flows from the day she stepped off that stagecoach. The crowd applauded, but Catherine barely heard it. She was aware only of Thomas's face, the love shining in his eyes and the gratitude swelling in her own heart. After the speech, they walked home together as a family, the children running ahead. Thomas took Catherine's hand. "Did I embarrass you?" he asked. "Not at all. You honored me." Catherine squeezed his fingers. "Though you give me too much credit, everything we have we built together." "We did," Thomas agreed. "But you started with nothing, and look at what you created. Look at our children, our ranch, our life. You are the most remarkable person I have ever known." That evening, after the children were in bed, Thomas and Catherine sat on the porch of their ranch house. The sun was setting in shades of gold and crimson, painting the desert in colors too beautiful for words. They sat close together, Thomas's arm around Catherine's shoulders, watching their land fade into twilight. "You ever think about that day?" Thomas asked. "The day you arrived?" "Sometimes," Catherine admitted. "It feels like a lifetime ago, like it happened to a different person." "In a way, it did. You are not the same woman who stepped off that stage." "No," Catherine agreed. "I am better, stronger, happier. I found myself here in this harsh, beautiful place. I found my purpose and my home. Most of all, I found you." Thomas turned to kiss her, a kiss full of tenderness and passion and promise. When they pulled apart, Catherine rested her head on his shoulder. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" "For seeing me when I had nothing. For giving me a chance. For giving me your heart and your name. For building this life with me. Thank you for accepting my heart and my name. For building this life with me. For loving me." Thomas kissed the top of her head. "For arriving on that last stagecoach and changing my life forever." They sat together as the stars emerged one by one overhead, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful and lasting. Catherine thought of all the years stretching ahead, all the challenges they would face together, all the joys yet to come. She thought of their children growing up on this land, learning the values of hard work and determination and love. She thought of grandchildren who would one day hear the story of how their grandmother arrived with nothing and their grandfather gave her everything. The years continued to unfold with the steady rhythm of ranch life. James grew into a capable young man who shared his father's gift with horses and cattle. He was quiet and thoughtful, but he had inherited his mother's head for business. Sarah was spirited and independent, equally comfortable in the kitchen or on horseback. The twins, Daniel and David, were inseparable troublemakers who kept everyone on their toes but worked hard when the situation demanded it. In 1895, when James was 17, he asked to attend university to study agricultural science. The request surprised Thomas, who had assumed his eldest son would simply take over the ranch eventually. But Catherine understood immediately. "He wants to learn new methods, better ways to manage the land and the herd," she explained to Thomas. "He wants to bring modern techniques back to the ranch. We should support him." It was difficult to let James go, but they sent him to the agricultural college in Tucson with their blessing and enough money for tuition. He returned 2 years later with a wealth of knowledge about crop rotation, water management, and selective breeding. Under his guidance, the ranch became even more profitable. Sarah surprised everyone by falling in love with the new schoolteacher who came to Prescott in 1897. He was a gentle, educated man from Boston, and Sarah's family worried he would take her away. But the teacher loved Arizona and had no desire to return east. He and Sarah married in 1898, and he built a small house on a corner of the ranch property. Sarah helped her mother manage the business side of the operation while teaching at the school 3 days a week. The twins showed no interest in settling down. They were adventurous and restless, always looking for the next challenge. They worked the ranch when needed but spent months at a time exploring the territory, occasionally sending letters describing their adventures. As the new century dawned, Thomas and Catherine found themselves grandparents multiple times over. James married a rancher's daughter from Flagstaff, and they produced 3 sturdy boys in quick succession. Sarah and her husband had 2 daughters who were as different as night and day, one bookish and quiet, the other wild and adventurous. Thomas and Catherine gradually stepped back from the daily management of the ranch, though Catherine still kept the books and Thomas still rode out to check the herds. They spent more time together, enjoying the fruits of their decades of labor. One evening in the summer of 1903, 25 years after Catherine had arrived in Prescott, they sat on their porch watching the sunset. Their grandchildren played in the yard under the watchful eyes of their parents. The ranch stretched out around them, prosperous and well-maintained, a testament to years of hard work and love. "You have any regrets?" Thomas asked Catherine. "About leaving Philadelphia? About the life you might have had?" Catherine considered the question seriously. "I regret the circumstances that forced me to leave, losing my parents, the poverty, the desperation. But I do not regret leaving itself. That life was not really mine. It was my father's life, my family's life. This life, the one we built together, is truly mine. Ours." She gestured to the scene before them, the ranch, the children and grandchildren, the land stretching to the horizon. "I would not trade this for anything. You gave me your heart and your name when I had nothing, and together we built something more valuable than any fortune my father might have left me. We built a legacy of love and hard work and family." Thomas took her hand, his fingers strong and calloused from a lifetime of ranch work. "You made me the luckiest man alive the day you said yes to my proposal. Every day since has been a gift." They sat in comfortable silence as the sky turned from gold to crimson to deep purple. Around them, their family laughed and played and lived, the sound of their joy carried on the desert breeze. Catherine thought back to that desperate girl who had sat outside the church, alone and terrified, with no idea what to do next. She thought about the handsome cowboy who had offered her water and kindness and, eventually, his whole heart. She thought about all the moments between then and now, the hard work and the challenges, the births and the losses, the triumphs and the setbacks. Each moment had been a thread in the tapestry of their life together, and the pattern that had emerged was more beautiful than anything she could have imagined. James came over to the porch, his own son on his shoulders. "Papa, Mama, we are going to head home. Thank you for supper." "You are welcome any time. You know that," Catherine said, standing to kiss her son's cheek and her grandson's hand. Sarah and her family followed, calling goodbyes and promises to return soon. The twins, who were visiting between adventures, stayed longer, regaling their parents with stories of prospecting in the mountains and encounters with wildlife. Finally, as the stars emerged overhead, Thomas and Catherine were alone again. They went inside to their bedroom, where Thomas carefully helped Catherine with the buttons of her dress, just as he had done thousands of times over their 25 years of marriage. "I love you," Thomas said, kissing her neck. "Every day I love you more." "And I love you," Catherine replied, turning in his arms. "My cowboy who saved me, my husband who built a life with me, my partner in everything." They made love slowly and tenderly, their bodies familiar with each other after so many years, but the passion still burning bright. Afterward they lay tangled together, Catherine's head on Thomas's chest, his hand stroking her hair. "Tell me again about the day we met," Catherine said sleepily. It was a story they returned to often, a touchstone of their relationship. Thomas smiled in the darkness. "I was riding back from checking the south pasture when I saw the stagecoach pull in. Something made me ride into town instead of heading straight back to the ranch. I told myself I needed supplies, but I think part of me knew I was meant to be there that day." "Fate," Catherine murmured. "Or Providence. I saw you walking down the street looking lost and heartbroken, and something in my chest just clenched. You were so beautiful, even exhausted and dusty from travel. But more than that, you looked strong, like you were determined not to break no matter what happened." "I was terrified," Catherine admitted. "I know, but you did not show it, not really. You sat on that bench outside the church with your back straight and your chin up, and I thought to myself, this is a woman who will not be defeated." Thomas kissed her forehead. "I had to talk to you. I had to help you somehow. Best decision I ever made." "Best decision I ever made was accepting your help," Catherine said, "and saying yes when you proposed, and building this life with you." They drifted off to sleep holding each other, the way they had every night for 25 years. The years continued to pass, bringing changes and challenges. In 1905, Arizona Territory began modernizing rapidly. Automobiles appeared on the streets of Prescott, though Thomas insisted horses were more reliable. Electricity came to town, though the ranch continued using kerosene lamps. The railroad expanded, making it easier to ship cattle to market. Through it all, Thomas and Catherine adapted and evolved. They had learned long ago that survival on the frontier required flexibility. They incorporated new methods when they made sense, but held fast to the values that had always served them: hard work, honesty, and family. In 1910, Thomas fell ill with pneumonia. Catherine nursed him through the worst of it, sitting by his bedside night after night, refusing to leave him. For a few terrifying days she thought she might lose him, but Thomas's strength and Catherine's devoted care pulled him through. He recovered slowly, and though he never regained his full vigor, he remained active and engaged. "You saved my life," Thomas told Catherine one morning as she helped him dress. His movements were slower now, his hair completely white, but his eyes still held the warmth she had fallen in love with decades ago. "You saved mine first," Catherine replied, "and I will always save yours. We are in this together, remember?" Arizona achieved statehood in 1912, and the whole territory celebrated. Thomas and Catherine attended the festivities in Prescott, now in their middle 50s but still vigorous. They watched the parade with their children and grandchildren around them, marveling at how much the world had changed since Catherine had arrived on that dusty stagecoach 34 years ago. "You remember when this was just a rough frontier town?" Catherine asked Thomas as they watched the elaborate floats pass by. "I remember when there were no boardwalks and the saloons outnumbered the churches," Thomas replied. "We have seen a lot of changes, love, and we have changed with them, adapted and grown." Catherine squeezed his hand. "Just like we promised we would." As they grew older, Thomas and Catherine gradually handed over more responsibility to their children. James managed the day-to-day operations of the ranch with competence and innovation. Sarah handled the business accounts and correspondence. Even the twins, finally settling down in their 30s, took on roles managing the far pastures and overseeing the seasonal workers. Thomas and Catherine spent their days enjoying the empire they had built together. They took long walks around the property, Thomas pointing out improvements he planned, and Catherine gently reminding him that their sons could handle such matters now. They spent hours with their grandchildren, teaching them skills and telling them stories about the old days. They sat on their porch every evening, watching the sunset and counting their blessings. In the spring of 1920, Thomas and Catherine celebrated their 42nd wedding anniversary. Their entire family gathered at the ranch for a party. There were now great-grandchildren running around, a new generation who would carry on the family legacy. Catherine looked around at all the faces her children, grown and capable. Her grandchildren, starting families of their own, her great-grandchildren, full of promise and possibility, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. Thomas stood to make a toast, his hand only slightly unsteady as he raised his glass. 42 years ago, I asked this woman to marry me. I was just a cowboy with a small amount of savings and big dreams. She was an educated lady who could have had her pick of refined gentlemen. But she said yes to me, and together we built something far beyond my dreams. He looked at Catherine, his eyes bright with emotion. You arrived on the last stagecoach with nothing. I gave you my heart and my name, but you gave me everything: love, family, purpose, joy. You have been my partner through good times and hard times. You have been my strength when I was weak and my comfort when I was troubled. Every good thing in my life flows from you. Catherine stood and went to her husband, taking his face in her hands. And you have been my anchor and my wings. You saw me when I was invisible. You valued me when I felt worthless. You loved me when I thought I was unlovable. You gave me a home and a family and a life beyond anything I imagined possible. They kissed while their family applauded and cheered. Then Catherine turned to address the gathering. You all are our legacy. Not the ranch or the money or the land, but you. The love we share, the values we pass down, the family we have built together. Promise me that you will always take care of each other, that you will work hard and love deeply and face challenges with courage. Those are the true riches in life. The party continued late into the evening with music and dancing and laughter. Catherine danced with Thomas, his steps slower now but his arms still strong around her. She danced with her sons and sons-in-law and grandsons. She held great-grandchildren and told them stories about their great-grandfather, the cowboy who had saved her life. As the celebration wound down and families began heading to their homes on various parts of the ranch property, Catherine and Thomas retired to their bedroom. Catherine sat at her dressing table, removing the pins from her hair. Thomas came to stand behind her, taking over the task with gentle fingers. You remember doing this on our wedding night? Catherine asked, watching him in the mirror. You were so nervous your hands shook. Thomas smiled at the memory. I was terrified I would somehow mess it up. You were so beautiful, and I was just a rough cowboy who had somehow convinced you to marry me. You were never just anything, Catherine said firmly. You were and are the best man I have ever known. They lay in bed together, Catherine's head on Thomas's shoulder, his arm around her. This had been their position for 42 years, and it still felt like the safest place in the world. Thank you for a wonderful life, Thomas said quietly. Thank you for taking a chance on me. Thank you for staying even when times were hard. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for seeing me, Catherine replied. Thank you for giving me your heart and your name. Thank you for building this beautiful life with me. Thank you for loving me. They fell asleep as they had so many thousands of nights before, wrapped in each other's arms, grateful for the love they had found and the life they had built together. The years that followed were gentler. the pace slower. Thomas's health declined gradually, his strong body finally showing the effects of decades of hard work. Catherine remained remarkably vigorous, though she too felt the weight of years. They spent most of their time at the ranch house, content to watch the world go by from their beloved porch. In the autumn of 1925, Thomas caught a cold that developed into bronchitis and then pneumonia. Despite Catherine's devoted nursing and the best medical care available, he grew weaker. The family gathered, knowing the end was near. On a cool October evening, with the sunset painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Thomas called Catherine to his side. She sat on the edge of the bed, holding his hand, their children and grandchildren filling the room. "I am not afraid," Thomas said, his voice weak but steady. "I have lived a good life. I have been blessed beyond measure." "Do not leave me," Catherine whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I am not ready. You are the strongest person I know. You will be fine." Thomas squeezed her hand with what strength remained. "Thank you for 47 years of happiness. Thank you for being my wife, my partner, my love. Wait for me, Catherine. When your time comes, I will be waiting for you." "I will," Catherine promised. "I will wait for you always." Thomas looked around the room at his family. "Take care of each other. Take care of your mother. Remember that love is the only thing that matters in the end. Everything else fades away, but love remains." He turned back to Catherine, his eyes full of love despite the pain and weakness. "I love you. I have loved you since the day you stepped off that stagecoach. I will love you for all eternity." "I love you too," Catherine said, leaning down to kiss him gently. "Until we meet again, my darling. Until we meet again." Thomas closed his eyes and slipped away peacefully, surrounded by the family he and Catherine had created together. The grief was overwhelming. Catherine felt as though part of her soul had been ripped away. For 47 years, Thomas had been her anchor, her partner, her other half. The world felt wrong without him in it. But Catherine was not alone. Her family rallied around her, providing support and comfort. Her children moved her into Sarah's house for a few months, afraid to leave her alone in her grief. Her grandchildren visited constantly, bringing their children to distract her. Slowly, painfully, Catherine learned to live without Thomas beside her. She found comfort in memories, in the legacy they had built together, in the faces of her descendants. She moved back to the ranch house after a few months, unable to stay away from the place where she and Thomas had lived their life together. Catherine lived for 6 more years, remaining active and engaged despite the ache in her heart. She watched her great-grandchildren grow and saw the birth of several great-great-grandchildren. She continued managing some of the ranch accounts, her mind still sharp even as her body weakened. She spent hours on the porch where she and Thomas had sat so many evenings, feeling his presence in the whisper of the wind and the colors of the sunset. In the spring of 1931, at the age of 71, Catherine fell ill. The doctor said her heart was simply tired, worn out after decades of work and love and life. Her children gathered around her bed, just as they had gathered around Thomas's bed 6 years before. "I am ready," Catherine told them, her voice peaceful. "I have had a beautiful life, far beyond anything I dreamed possible when I stepped off that stagecoach 53 years ago. I was blessed with a love that sustained me, a family that fulfilled me, and a purpose that gave my life meaning." She looked at each of her children in turn. "You have all made me so proud. You have built good lives, raised good children, and carried on the values your father and I tried to instill. The ranch will continue long after I am gone, but more importantly, the love will continue. That is what truly matters." Sarah held her mother's hand. "Thank you for everything you taught us. Thank you for showing us what strength looks like. Thank you for loving us and Papa so completely." Catherine smiled. "It was my privilege and my joy. Tell the grandchildren and great-grandchildren about us. Tell them about the girl who arrived with nothing and the cowboy who gave her his heart and his name. Tell them how we built something beautiful together. Tell them that love is always worth the risk." As the sun set that evening, painting the Arizona sky in the colors Catherine had loved for more than 5 decades, she closed her eyes for the last time. Her final words were, "I am coming, Thomas. Wait for me." Catherine was buried beside Thomas on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together. Their headstone was simple but elegant, bearing both their names and the dates of their lives, along with a single line. Together they built a legacy of love. The ranch continued for generations after them, passed down through their children and grandchildren. The original house where Catherine and Thomas had lived their life together was preserved as a family shrine, a reminder of where it all began. The story of how Catherine arrived on the last stagecoach with nothing, and how Thomas gave her his heart and his name became family legend, told and retold to each new generation. And sometimes, in the evenings when the sunset painted the sky in gold and crimson, those who lived on the ranch swore they could see 2 figures sitting on the old porch, a cowboy and his lady, together again at last, watching over the land and the family they had created with nothing but love, determination, and faith in each other. The legacy of Catherine and Thomas Ellsworth lived on not just in the prosperous ranch that bore their name, but in the values they had instilled in their descendants. Hard work, integrity, courage, and above all, love. These were the true riches they had passed down, worth far more than land or cattle or money. Their great-great-grandchildren grew up hearing the story of their remarkable ancestors. They heard about the desperate young woman who had lost everything, about the kind cowboy who had offered her a chance, about the love that had sustained them through decades of challenges and triumphs. They learned that sometimes the greatest fortunes come not from what we inherit or what we are given, but from what we build with our own hands and hearts. And so the story of Catherine Lancaster Ellsworth and Thomas Ellsworth became more than just family history. It became a testament to the transformative power of love, the strength of the human spirit, and the beautiful truth that sometimes our lowest moments lead us to our greatest blessings. Catherine had arrived with nothing, but in the end, she had everything that truly mattered: love, family, purpose, and a life well lived alongside the man who had seen her worth when no one else did, who had given her his heart and his name, and who had built a beautiful future with her from the ashes of her past.